Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Sandy.
And this is the Italian American Stories podcast. Well, we are in our final episode of the Axeman victims.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, all of them.
I know these stories, they're interesting and they're sad and unbelievable almost at times.
Right. The guy was a monster.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And, like we've talked about in the other episodes, bulk of these victims are victims of the Axeman, but they could be some black hand in there too. But no matter what, whoever's doing this is, like you said, monsters.
Right.
Just horrible.
Right.
But like I said, this is our last episode for the Axeman victims. We will talk about, oh my gosh, I can't even remember how many families we talk about in this one. 4 or 5? I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't know.
But we'll talk about a few and then we will be done with the Axeman murders. So last week, though, just to kind of recap, we talked about 3 families, the Chambras, the Andolinas, and the Maggios. So we'll dive in today with the rest of the Italian American victims, and we're going to start with the attack on the Romano family, and this happened in 1918. So with the Maggios, that's where we left off last week. That attack happened on May 23rd, 1918. So we're picking up within the same year as the Maggio attack with the Romano family. So Joseph Romano, he was actually not a grocery store owner. So that's a little bit different. He was a barber, but he lived with his sister Annie and her 2 daughters. And Annie is the one that owned a grocery store. So
somebody owned a grocery
store and he lived in that building. And it's funny because with the Maggios, which is what we left off last week's episode with, Andrew, the brother,
was the
barber and living with his brother who was the grocery store owner. Yeah. So this is very similar, but it's reversed because Joseph, the barber, is the one who got attacked in the home though.
Right.
But with Joseph, there's not a lot of information on his past or his family history. So we're just going to jump into the night of the attack. The attack happened on Saturday, August 10th, 1918 at 3 a.m. And Joseph, he was 30 years old. He was attacked while he slept in his bed. So Joseph was struck over the head by an axe that belonged to his sister, and she kept it out in the yard to cut wood. So kind of the same MO here. And when Joseph was attacked, he let out a really loud groan. And this woke up his 2 nieces. And his nieces' names were Pauline and Mary, and they were sleeping in another room. But it was loud enough that it woke them up. And Pauline, she was the older sister. She got up and went out of her bedroom to see if she could kind of figure out what was going on. And when she opened the door, she saw the intruder coming out of her uncle's room, and he was carrying the axe, and he was headed towards her room.
Oh, wow. So he knew there were other people in there, not just Joseph.
Exactly. He knew there were other people. So, of course, this startles her and she lets out a really loud scream, and this freaked the intruder out and he ran out of the house. And she said that he ran out of the kitchen door and jumped the back fence and took off. But he also, on his way out, he dropped the axe in the kitchen. Because the axe it's never his. It's always the family's.
Right.
And this axe man always leaves it too. So... Crazy. But not only did it scare off the intruder, her scream got the attention of her uncle. So Joseph, who just got attacked. And when Joseph heard his niece scream, he got out of bed and went to check on the girls. And so, obviously he's confused. And the girls, they said that he didn't even know that he was hurt or that he was bleeding. And so, they said that he had blood streaming down his face. And the girls told Joseph that he was attacked and he was hurt. And so he tells them, okay, well, go call for help, and I'm going to go sit down in the living room in a chair and rest for a while. Because I think at this point, he still
not aware that
he's hurt. Yeah. And so the ambulance comes to the house, and Joseph, he was still conscious, but sadly later that day, he did die at the hospital. His skull had been fractured in a couple of places. And so when the police arrived at the home and they started doing their investigation, they noticed that some of Joseph's clothes were strewn throughout the house. And the police were, like I said, they were able to briefly talk to Joseph before he was taken to the hospital. And Joseph said that he didn't know who attacked him. But the girls told the police that the clothes were what Joseph was wearing the previous day. So they said that he would always come home, and when he changed out of his clothes, he would lay his clothes on a chair that was in his room. So this attacker took these clothes and put them throughout the house and was going through them. But the girls said that they weren't sure if anything was stolen at that point.
He took them out of Joseph's bedroom?
He took them out of the bedroom.
Before he went to the girls.
And it kind of made me wonder, was he planning on changing clothes? Remember how...
Right.
Was it with the... I think it was with the Maggios, because they thought it was Andrew who did it. But they said the intruder changed out of clothes and put him in the corner. So I wonder if that's what this guy was planning on doing and the niece interrupted.
Oh, probably.
Kind of makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, that's basically kind of all that the police knew at that point. And Superintendent Mooney, we talked about him last episode. He's with the police department and he's been working on a lot of these cases. He made a statement to the press, and I'm actually just going to read it. Mooney says, "I'm convinced that the Romano murder is the work of a madman, an axe-wielding degenerate who has no robbery motive, but who has taken small sums to throw police off the track. Take this for the gospel. We're going to get him yet. I'm doing everything in human power to run down this murderous maniac. As these axe murders have grown in number, I've been forced to the belief that it is the work of a madman. Since the first one that was committed after I took this job, I've been working on this theory. We're going to get him." So obviously Moody, he's very invested in these cases. He wants to find this guy. He wants the killings to stop. I mean, to make a statement like that, you can tell he's invested. Right. He cares.
Right.
And so while we're talking about Mooney, I want to talk about a Piggly Wiggly ad that we ran across. And we actually mentioned this at the end of last week's episode. And just a warning, this ad it's very cruel. It's about the only way I know how to put it.
Yeah, when I saw the ad, I wasn't for sure how to take it.
Yeah.
I didn't yet actually realize it was a joke.
So this ad, it was taken out in one of the New Orleans newspapers. Actually, it was in quite a few of them. So the Piggly Wiggly, it's a grocery store. It's still around, I think. I've heard of it.
I've been to Piggly Wiggly in Oklahoma several years back, so I'm assuming it might be a southern thing. A southern thing.
Actually, I want to say I saw one in Florida one time when I was there on vacation a long time ago. So anyways, this ad, it was taken out in a lot of the New Orleans newspapers, and it just says, "Attention, Mr. Mooney." And so that's our superintendent, our guy that's really working on the case. "Attention, Mr. Mooney and all citizens of New Orleans. The Axeman will appear in this city on Saturday, August 24th at the following places." And then the ad lists 3 different addresses, basically. Their address
of the Piggly
stores. Yes. "He will ruthlessly use the Piggly Wiggly axe in cutting off the heads of all high-priced groceries. His weapon is wonderful and his system unique. Don't miss seeing him. Watch this paper tomorrow for the full story and read it from top to bottom. Don't skip a line, for each line tells you how the Piggly Wiggly self-serving system saves you money. Remember, $1 saved is $1 made, and the Piggly Wiggly stores are based on this axiom."
Yeah, that blows me away. They could care less about the victims at all. They're just taking advantage of it. It's sad.
It's sad. And you're exactly right. They're taking advantage of this horrible situation. They don't care about the victims. They don't care about Frank Mooney, who's, to me, it sounds like he's working really hard to solve these cases. And it's a slam. It's a slam to the police officers. It's a slam to the families.
Throwing it in their face like, we don't really care anyway, so let's make fun of this.
Exactly, and let's see if we can use this to bring more people into our grocery store so we can make money, even though these poor immigrant families have lost everything due to an axe. And the fact that they say, we're going to be cutting the heads off.
Maybe they're behind all this about the Italian grocers. They're taking all the grocery stores down.
Kind of makes you wonder, right? It's actually kind of a valid point that you bring up.
You never know.
and we'll post this ad on the Instagram page so that everybody can see it. All right. Well, let's get back to poor Joseph. So Joseph's family was questioned, and they told the police that Joseph was a really hard worker and he had a lot of friends. He made about $15 a week, and that's about $312 today. And he was known to only carry about $2 or $3 most of the time. And it kind of made it sound like in the paper, he was a young guy. He wasn't married. He didn't have kids. He'd go out and have fun. And so he kind of I think what it was alluding to was he'd kind of go through that paycheck pretty quick every week. And so, with all of this taken into account, the police, they were kind of ruling out robbery. Even though his clothes are ransacked, but we talked about that a little bit, what maybe the motive was. They did say, though, that Joseph's gold watch and a diamond ring were not taken. So the gold watch was sitting on his dresser, and the diamond ring, it was on Joseph's hand. So
yeah, and I'm sure he saw that if he took the clothes.
Yeah, especially the watch being on the dresser. Right. So they were basically ruling out robbery at this time. The coroner said that Joseph, he must have been laying on his right side when he was struck by the axe, and he was struck twice in the back of the head. So poor little Pauline, she's the one that came out of the bedroom. She was only 13, and she told the police that she has been nervous for weeks about the Axeman. She said she could hardly sleep at night, and the night that her uncle was attacked, she was just starting to doze off when she heard her uncle make a weird sound. And that kind of broke my heart because she's 13. She's aware of all these attacks happening to Italian Americans who own a grocery store, and she can't even sleep at night. Right. She's so worried.
Yeah, that's sad.
And, as much as we've talked about the victims and stuff, that was kind of an insight that we haven't had yet, where you see how it affects everybody else.
That's true. And being 13, you should have a whole lot of different things on your mind than
yes.
worrying about an Axeman.
Exactly.
But I don't blame her.
Oh, no, definitely. And honestly, a lot of Italian Americans were starting to feel this way. They were watching guard at each other's houses. They were taking shifts through the night. They would stay up with shotguns and pistols and, kind of patrol their home and their area. But Pauline, she was able to give a description of the man. She said he was tall, heavy set, and had a dark suit on and a black hat. So not much of a description, but it's what she could do. Joseph, he was buried on Monday, August 12th, 1918. And even though the police had a few suspects, Joseph's case, it went cold. So we're actually going to talk about our next family. And this will be the bulk of our episode right here with this next family. It's a crazy one. It takes a few twists and turns.
Oh, wow.
And this is the Cortimiglia family. And the couple was Vincent or Vincenzo Charles Cortimiglia and Rosie Cortimiglia. And Vincent, he actually went by Charles, so we're just going to call him Charles from here on out. So Charles was born on August 2nd, 1890 in Palermo, Sicily. And Rosie, she was born in New Orleans in 1898, and her parents came to America from Italy. I'm just not really sure when, and I wasn't sure about her birth date either. So Charles and Rosie, they were married in 1913, and they ended up owning a grocery store together. And the couple, they also had one child together that they named Mary. And on Sunday, March 9th, 1919, an intruder entered the Cortimiglia home. When the intruder entered their bedroom, all three of the Cortimiglias were sleeping in the bed. So you've got mom, dad, and
baby Mary.
Baby Mary. Yeah, she was really young. Charles and Rosie, they were badly injured, but they were still alive. Baby Mary was mortally wounded.
Oh,
I know. So the same morning around 7 a.m., a neighbor girl went to the Cortimiglia's store to buy some groceries. And this little girl, she was surprised that they were still not open. And so she walked her around to the back of the building where the family lived, and she couldn't really tell if anybody was up and about. But we've seen this before too, where...
Right. In the last, I think it was the last episode.
I think so too.
5 a.m.
And it was...
2 boys or something.
I was going to say, it's always like 2 little kids or a kid that comes to the grocery store and figures out like, well, the grocery store's not open, something's going on. But as she was kind of walking around the house, she noticed that the bottom panel of their back door was missing.
Same thing.
And so she was kind of wandering around. Well, another neighbor who lived in the area had come to buy groceries, and he was growing suspicious too. Like, why isn't anybody here? And so he walked around the building and ran into the little girl, and she kind of told him what she found. And he was like, well, I'm too big to fit through the panel. Go through the panel and go see what's going on in the house.
Oh no.
It's like, oh, please don't make her do that. She's only 9 years old. I don't know if I mentioned that, but she's only 9. And her name's Hazel. So poor little Hazel, she crawls through the bottom panel of the door. And when she gets into the house, she makes her way back to the bedroom, and she finds all 3 of them bloody in the bed.
Oh boy.
I know, poor little thing. And so she goes running out of the house screaming, of course, and this got the attention of the neighbors. So the Cortimiglia's neighbors were Frank Giordano and his son Frank Jr. So Frank Sr., once they got into the house and they worked their way back to the bedroom, he actually picked up Charles, but it was more like sat him up in bed and kind of raised him up I don't really know what his purpose of doing this was. Maybe just because he was worried about him, wanted to check on him, because Charles is laying down and he kind of just puts him into a sitting position so he could talk to him. And I guess at this point, Charles woke up and told Frank, "I'm dying, go get my brother-in-law." And so Frank, he didn't go get the brother-in-law. They went and called the authorities. And once the authorities and the ambulance were there, the family was taken to Charity Hospital. Charles, his skull was fractured. And Rosie, she had 5 wounds to her head and her skull was fractured as well. And like we mentioned earlier, baby Mary, she ended up dying at the home. So, and she only had 1 blow to the head, but it's a baby. So It's just, ugh. But Charles and Rosie, they were listed in critical condition, but the doctors were pretty sure that they would make it through. So the police, when they were doing their investigation, they found the axe laying under the steps of the porch, and it was covered in blood, and it did belong to the family. And the police were not sure who was attacked first, but there were signs of some sort of a struggle in the room. So they were thinking that maybe Rosie was hit first, and then the intruder went after Charles, but Charles may have put up a fight. Now, the house, it was ransacked, and some trunks were rifled through, and a lot of cabinet doors were open. But like with the cabinet door and the clock, nothing really seemed to be disturbed. So the police were starting to think that maybe it was robbery, but it also could have been staged to look like robbery, because the police, they also found a large amount of money between the mattresses, and there was a box that had jewelry and silver pieces, and it was out in the open, but this box was untouched. So I don't know. It's hard to say. You know, a lot of this stuff could have been done the night before by the family. You never know. I mean, right. It is
how things were left the night before.
Yeah, they could have been looking for something and then couldn't find it and were tired and like, oh, let's just go to bed. We'll clean up in the morning. Who knows? But Frank and his son, Frank Jr., they were questioned by the police. And Frank and his family, this is crazy, they actually owned a grocery store and lived right next door to the Cortamiglias. So like you and I have talked about before, it seems like there was a grocery store every other home in this area. Yeah. But Frank said that their families, they got along fine. And he also said that he never heard anything the morning of the attack. Now, Frank Jr., he said that he didn't hear anything either, but he kept talking about a dream that he had the night before. He had a feeling based off of this dream that some sort of evil would happen in the neighborhood.
See, all those kids were in fear.
So when the police pushed further, it did come out that before Charles opened up his own grocery store, he actually took over Frank's grocery store. So for some reason, Frank and his family had to step away from their grocery store for a while. I don't know why. I couldn't figure out the circumstances. So Charles and his family, they came in and ran the store for the Giordanos. But when Frank and his family resumed running the grocery store, Charles probably decided that he liked that business. Maybe he enjoyed running their grocery store, and he thought, you know what, I'm going to build a home and a grocery store right next to you and run my own grocery store. But Frank insisted, though, that there was no bad blood between the two families, which...
Right. It's just amazing to me how many grocery stores did they say, okay, you can sell this and I'll sell this?
That's exactly.
Because how many people live that, when you have 4 grocery stores and 4 blocks?
This is kind of just an odd tidbit, but I wanted to throw it in here. So the Cortamiglias, they had a little dog that they named Garibaldi. And this poor dog, apparently the whole day of the attack, was just walking around the property, crying and whimpering. Aww. And I know, it's so sad. And all the neighbors, they were trying to get the dog to eat, but the dog refused. And it was like, basically, they explained it like the dog was just lost and just wandering.
Right.
Poor thing.
Just like a child.
Exactly. Like the dog probably knew something happened, but didn't know what was going on. So poor little Mary, she was buried on Monday, March 10th, 1919. And Rosie's family, they kind of took over because Charles, he didn't really have any family in America. His family was in Italy. So Rosie's family, they stepped in, they put the funeral on, and it was said to be one of the most largely attended funerals that year. And of course, it was extremely heartbreaking. But it's really sad that her parents, they weren't even able to attend the funeral because they were still in the hospital at this point.
Right. That's sad.
It is.
But that was good of those other people to take care of them.
Yeah, exactly. So when the police went to the hospital to question Charles and Rosie, the physicians, they refused to let them see the couple. They said, they're awake, but they're not really with it. They're kind of in and out of consciousness, and they just need time and rest. So you can't question them right now. And Charles, he apparently had to be restrained in his hospital bed because while he was sleeping, he would scream out different things and he was lashing around in his bed. And so, in his mind, he was probably reliving some of that, which kind of makes me wonder, did he stand up and fight? Because remember, they said they could tell like there was some sort of a struggle. So
I bet he did.
I bet he did too. So, however, by Tuesday, the police, they were allowed to question Charles and Rosie, but they didn't get very far. Charles would only say that his head hurt and that he needed to get back to work. And I guess that was his answer to every question that they said. And Rosie, who spoke English, would only speak in Italian. So the police were like, okay, let's give him a couple more days and we'll come back, because they're not with it yet. So over the next couple of days, the police continued to try and question the couple, and even reporters were allowed in to question them and get their story. And one reporter said that Charles, he just seemed to answer yes to everything. And so the reporter proved this by asking Charles if he was a Frenchman, and Charles said yes. So, it was just kind of oui. It's pretty evident here that they still needed some time to recover. And Rosie, she would mumble yes or no answers to questions, but her answers were not detailed. And they kind of specified they weren't even really sure if she understood what they were asking. Apparently, one of the police officers asked her if Frank Giordano and his son, so the neighbors, were the men who attacked her and her family, and she responded yes.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so this is where one of our twists come in here. And so this actually resulted in the father and son being arrested and detained in the local jail. I think where the police are going is, okay, they were the ones who found them. There might have been this business rivalry between the two. And then when she said yes, they jumped on it. So...
yeah, because she wasn't even answering sanely, but...
Exactly. She was not fully recovered here yet.
Right.
And a lot of reporters actually came out and kind of said the same thing. They made statements after the arrest claiming that Rosie was not in a good frame of mind to make clear statements. One reporter even said that he had asked her, "Who hit you?" And she said, I don't know, maybe my husband. So she has no idea.
Right.
And so the doctor at the hospital was even quoted saying, "The injuries may leave them both with faulty minds." So it's little scary here, and that these guys are getting arrested.
Yeah, that just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. The police are probably like, we got to get somebody,
Right. Yeah, it's going on too long, and it's not looking good on them. That Mooney.
Exactly, who swears that he's going to catch this
Right.
killer. So regardless, though, Frank and Frank Jr., they were both arrested. And Frank Sr., he was 63 at the time, and Frank Jr. was 17. And what's interesting is the papers, they really emphasized the physical appearance of the two men. And so they described Frank Sr. as being frail and thin, and Jr. as being short and very overweight. And so the paper pointed out that he was 230 pounds, which was extremely overweight for his height. And so I think, though, what the papers were actually trying to do, I don't think that they were trying to be mean. I think what they were trying to do is show that the physical characteristics of Frank Sr. and Frank Jr., this doesn't work out very well. So they're basically saying, like, Frank Jr. is too big to fit through the bottom panel of the door, and Frank Sr. is too frail to commit this kind of a crime. Also, Jr., he had a really bad accident a few months prior when he fell off of a horse, and he was apparently still recovering from that accident. It doesn't sound like he broke any bones, but he was described as being really sore, and he had a little bit of a head injury too. So, the newspapers are kind of like, I don't know, police officers, you might want to rethink this. So the charges against the Giordanos, it was murder and attempted murder. And the motive, the police said, was obviously due to the business rivalry. And the father and son, they were held without bail, and the trial was scheduled for May of, 1919? Mm-hmm. But by March 19th, Rosie, she was almost fully recovered, and the police, they continued to question her about the Giordanos. And she continued to agree that it was the Giordanos who attacked her family. So, wow. I know, it's kind of weird. So on March 29th, Rosie, she was released from the hospital, but Charles was still in the hospital recovering, and he was still not in a frame of mind where he could really be questioned. So in April, Rosie, she went in front of a coroner's jury and testified that it was the Giordanos that attacked them. And she was pretty detailed too. She said that they struck Charles first, and then she pleaded with them to spare Mary, but they struck her anyways, and then they went after her. So she had some details here.
Wow. So maybe I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either. It's kind of interesting, especially for her to be so detailed. But like I said earlier, Charles, he was still in the hospital when she testified. He was not as coherent as her, but he did know what was happening with the Giordanos. So he knew that they were arrested and they were in jail, and he completely disagreed with Rosie. He was telling the police officers, I don't think that it was the Giordanos. She's not remembering this right. There's no way it was them. He was adamant. But I think the police were kind of blowing him off because the doctors are telling him he's still recovering from his head injury. So the trial, it actually began on Monday, May 18th, 1919. And Rosie, she testified during the trial too. So I'm just going to sum up her testimony. She said that they had an electric light that was burning in the center of the room, and they would usually leave that on during the night. So because of this, she was able to really see the intruders' faces, who she's identifying as Frank and Frank Jr. So she said that Frank Sr., he struck the child with the axe, and he struck the child while she was holding this little baby in her arms and pleading with him to spare its innocent life. But after Frank Sr. struck the baby, he handed the axe to Frank Jr., and then Frank Jr. attacked Charles and then turned on Rosie and attacked her. So there's her testimony. So that was the prosecutor that was asking her that. And then the defense attorney came in. So the attorney that was defending the Giordanos came in and questioned her. And he said, and I'm actually going to read this testimony. He said, "You didn't scream?" asked Mr. Brines. So Mr. Brines is the Giordano's attorney. And she said, "No, I was thinking only of my baby." "You didn't jump out of bed?" "No." "You didn't try to throw the baby out of bed?" And she said, "No, I hugged it to my heart." "You didn't kick your husband in the side?" These are some strange questions, right?
Right.
And she said, "No." "You didn't call to him?" "No." "You didn't fight?" "No, I'm a decent woman." And then the attorney said, "Too decent to fight for your life, for your baby's life, for your husband?" And she responded, "I could think only of my baby. It was all too quick. It may take a long time to tell it, but it all happened in no time. Frank killed my baby in my arms, began hitting me over the head, and I lost consciousness." And I can see her point. I mean,
she clutched her child, and what else are you going to do? I'm sure this is probably less than 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's less than 2 minutes.
It has to be. And, she's probably in a little bit of shock, was trying to figure out what was happening. So anyways, that testimony, I saw in the paper where a lot of the jurors were kind of a little shocked by that testimony, but I don't know. I kind of found it sad. And weird questioning. You didn't throw the baby. You didn't kick your husband.
Yeah.
Like, come on. So both father and son, so Frank and Frank Jr., they took the stand claiming that they were innocent. And even Frank's wife, so also Frank Jr.'s mother, her name was Lily, she took the stand. But here's part of Frank Sr.'s testimony. He said, "I am 66 years old. I was in bed at my own home during the time the murder was done. I have rheumatism so bad that my wife even had to rub my back to help me out of the bed the next morning when the alarm was sounded that the Cortimiglias had been butchered. Were you or were you not in the Cortimiglia home that night?" So that's the attorney asking him. "No, not true, not true," the old man said. So that kind of just gives a insight into how frail Frank Sr. was. And so when his wife, Lily, she took the stand, they asked her if her husband had left the bed before that morning. And she said, "No, I would have known if he had gotten out of bed." And she said, "My child and my old man are innocent before God," she cried. "We don't know nothing." Then she broke out into tears and was excused from the witness stand. So Frank Jr., he also took the stand, and he basically said the same thing. We never left our house until we were made aware that the Cortimiglias had been attacked. But he also talked about his dream again. So remember earlier when the police came to the crime scene, he was telling them that he had a bad dream. And so on the stand, he said that his dream was that he was surrounded by snakes.
Oh,
and
boy.
I know, it's a little creepy. And he woke up the next morning and he asked his mom and his sister if they could help him interpret what that dream meant. And I guess his mother and his sister were both saying, "Well, I think that means that we're surrounded by evil." He was just very adamant about this dream and how I think he thought maybe it would help prove his innocence. Like, I was scared too. I was dreaming about how horrible this is.
Right. We talked about everybody was scared.
Everybody was scared. So anyways, the defense brought doctors in to testify about Rosie and her injury. And the defense attorneys were questioning if she could truly account for the events that happened that night based off of her injury. I mean, she spent like almost a week and a half, 2 weeks in the hospital.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the dates, but I'm sure it was a 2-week span, if not more.
I think they were attacked on March 10th and she didn't get out until March 29th.
Yeah, that's right.
And so this testimony, it was actually pretty powerful. And it was the coroner who came in and testified, and his name was Dr. Joseph O'Hara. And he said, Miss Cortimiglia is suffering from paranoia, and that while she believes the story to which she testified at the trial, she is suffering from a fixed, systemized, forced mental delusion, taking the form of a belief that she was attacked by the Giordanos, resulting from a condition of intense jealousy between the two families due to business rivalry. So, he's basically saying she believes this, but it's probably not true. That's pretty powerful, testimony by that doctor.
Right. And I tend to go on that, his belief too.
I do too.
She had too major of a head injury.
Yes. I mean, she wasn't even speaking English when
Right.
And she could speak Italian, so she spoke both languages, but she couldn't even answer in English. I mean, that's bad. Yeah. So anyways, this testimony by the doctor, it actually led to the judge ordering Rosie to undergo some tests to determine if she was sane or well enough to remember the events. And she was proven by a completely different doctor to be sane. But she's also, we're also talking later on down the road. So,
Yeah, 2 months later.
2 months later, where she may be almost fully recovered. I don't know. It's tricky. So the trial came to a close on Tuesday, May 27th, 1919, and the jury handed down a guilty verdict to both Frank Sr. and Frank Jr.
Wow.
I know. Frank Sr., he received the death penalty, and Frank Jr. received life in prison. So this is serious here. I mean,
wow.
And we're talking, it's May 27th.
So fast.
So fast.
And the only proof is
her testimony.
Which is so questionable.
It is, yeah. And, it's questionable. And I don't think that it's a malicious thing on her part. I think she truly believes that happened. So Charles, he had been released from the hospital by the time the trial ended. And like I said earlier, he was certain that the Giordanos were not the killers, and he still believed that. But he was not permitted to testify at the trial because the doctor said that he was not well enough to. And because of this, Charles is honestly blown away. He cannot believe that she believes this. And it actually causes the couple to split.
Oh.
Yeah. So she moved out of the home and the grocery store. But poor Charles, he actually found himself back in the hospital in June of that same year when he accidentally shot himself in the hand when he was cleaning his gun. Then a month later, he was back in the hospital for accidentally shooting himself in the hand again when he was cleaning a gun for a friend. So from March to July, this poor man was in the hospital 3 times. Rosie, she really struggled after the trial, and she had a few weird things pop up. So in November of 1919, she was arrested in a hotel, and I saw a couple of different scenarios on why she might have been arrested. So the first one said that she was arrested for selling stolen goods, and she had sold things like diamond rings and bracelets. So the other thing that I saw was she was arrested because of a moral code violation. What I saw was that she was spending time with a man in the hotel, and he was paying her with jewelry.
Oh.
So I don't know which one is true, but those were both reported. So Rosie and Charles, they were still married at this point, and the police called Charles to come get her from jail. And he actually refused, stating that he wanted nothing to do with her. I think with the attack and now this arrest and the Giordanos, it was just too much for him too. But Rosie, she told the police that if he didn't come get her, she would kill herself. So the police sent her to the isolation hospital. I don't know if is that a mental institution.
Right.
Okay. I was like, is that the name of the hospital, or is that what they call it, a mental institution?
I think it's a mental institution.
Okay.
You're suicidal.
Sure. I agree. I think that that's what it is. So after she got out of the isolation hospital, she moved in with some family, and she was working at a tomato jarring factory. Something, though, changed in her because in February of 1920, she walked into the police station and recanted her statement.
Oh, wow. Here we go.
Here's a new twist for us. So, she walks in and she's basically saying, I'm recanting my statement. The Giordanos are innocent. And so the police asked her, well, what made you want to recant this statement? And she told them that she had a vision that Saint Joseph came to her and said, Rosie, you cannot die until your conscience is clear.
Wow.
Yes. So that's really interesting. I think that was this vision that she had was her breaking point, and she thought, I have to make this right. But I did see in an article where they interviewed some of her friends and family, and they were saying that her memories were starting to come back, and she was starting to question her statement, basically. Starting to question, was it really the Giordanos? And she was having these different memories of the night of the attack come back.
Yeah, because this is going on almost a year later.
Yes.
And we talked earlier about all of this was taken in less than 3 weeks.
Her statement and everything was less than 3 weeks, and then they were sentenced and sent to prison in like a month and a half.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and so her friends and her family were like, well, maybe you need to go talk to the police. And she kind of held off for a little while, and then she had this, it was like a vision or a dream. I saw it as both about St. Joseph, and that was her breaking point, and she was like, I need to go make this right. So it speaks to what that doctor said about how, she was not well enough to testify, basically. Right. So when they asked her why she accused the Giordanos, she said that everybody kept telling her that it was them, and she eventually believed it. So
that makes sense.
Makes total sense. So she even told the police officers that she was starting to have those memories come back. And she actually remembered both the attackers as being tall, thin, and having black hair. So that's
totally opposite.
Totally opposite of the Franks or the Giordanos. And reporters, they asked Lily Giordano how she felt about this. And she said that she was so relieved. She said her and Frank had worked so hard since they came to America from Sicily. And she just wanted him and her son to come home so they could just continue life.
Thank goodness, boy.
I know, because
this is twisted.
It is. It's really crazy, right? And so they also asked her if she forgave Rosie. And she said, of course she did. She felt really bad for Rosie and everything that she had gone through. I think at this point, she's just so relieved that her family's going to be out of prison. She's just thrilled. So Frank Sr., he was interviewed in prison, and he said he was so relieved and happy that she told the truth. He said he had been waiting for her to come forward and tell the truth. And he also said that he forgave her and hoped that she was doing better. And so because of all of this, with Rosie coming forward, they had an appeal hearing on February 7th for the Giordanos, and the state Supreme Court stepped in and said that the Giordanos should have a retrial, and that was scheduled for later in 1920. So they're not released. Everything's just kind of put on hold.
And the retrial's not going to be until 1920?
Well, this is 1920 now. Yes,
okay,
because she came in February of 1920. And so Rosie, she started to really fear that she would be arrested for giving a false statement the first time. But the sheriff said that, there's no intentions of arresting her. We just want her statement so that we can get this right. And the new trial, it actually started on May 24th, 1920. So these poor guys, they had to wait. I'm sure it was like the longest 3 months ever.
Oh, I'm sure.
And when the attorneys, they were going over the evidence for the trial, they found $134 that belonged to the Cortamiglias. And I just thought that this was interesting. So the judge said, well, we don't need that in evidence. Give it back to Charles. And apparently when Charles got it, the money had blood on it, because this was the money that was tucked in there between their mattresses. Okay. Unfortunately, though, this trial keeps getting pushed back. And so it was supposed to start in May. Something happened, and it gets pushed to Monday, November 22nd, 1920. So you're talking another 6 months.
Wow, this is what should have happened at the first.
Yes. Let's
so everybody
truly,
can heal.
Yes, let's truly make sure we have our ducks in the row the first time. Right. And so this is actually really sad, because one of Frank Sr.'s daughters, she gave birth to a baby boy that same month, but sadly she passed away during birth. And so Frank, he couldn't be there for the birth of his grandson. He couldn't be there to bury his daughter. Right. And it's just so heartbreaking. Luckily though, the case, it did start in November, but in the middle of the trial, when Rosie was set to testify, she didn't show up.
Oh, good grief.
I know. So
what the heck?
So the judge is like, all right, we're going to pause this and we'll pick it back up on December 6th. Somebody go find Rosie. So they find Rosie and they convince her, look, we're not going to arrest you, but you need to show up and do this this testimony. We
Or
are
else nothing else is going to change.
Exactly. This all weighs on you. So she agrees and she's like, okay, I will be there. December 6th comes around. Rosie's there, ready to testify. And as the trial is getting started, the judge makes a statement and says, you know what? We're done with this. I'm done with this. All charges are dismissed. Go home, Giordano's. They were free. He just let him go.
He didn't even wait for her testimony?
Didn't even wait for the testimony. I think this judge was so done.
Right.
And he actually later on came out and said that he truly believed they were innocent. He really did not think that they were the killers. And I think he was just done with all the drama. And he was like, go home. Everybody leave.
Well, good, but...
Very good, yes. It's just such a up and down with all of this.
Right.
You know, like...
This has been a good, crazy one. You said it was going to
Yeah,
be.
this is the crazy one of this episode. I mean, they're all crazy in their own way, but this one had a lot of information. And so Frank Sr., he actually only lived a few years after he was released from prison. He passed away in 1925.
Well, at least he was free.
At least he was free, exactly. And Frank Jr., he actually went on to become a successful rancher and a real estate developer.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah, he had over 500 head of cattle and 75 horses. And he actually ended up marrying his sweetheart that he had before he went to prison.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's good.
Well, but that marriage didn't really last that long because
that was quick.
she was arrested pretty quick after their marriage for throwing a banjo and shoes at him. So
Sorry.
I know, but the banjos and the shoes, like... It's just so random. But he did end up it is pretty funny. It would be interesting to know the whole, like, what led up to the banjo and the shoes. Yeah. But he did end up remarrying, and he seemed to live a happy and full life. He actually passed away at the age of 59 in 1961.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I mean,
and he
had a good life.
Exactly. He seemed to be like a really well-known, respected member of the community. So, and Charles and Rosie, they actually reconciled their differences and decided, let's move to California. We need a fresh start. But they didn't make it very long. They sadly divorced in 1929. So I'm not actually sure what happened to Rosie after this. Charles, though, he did pass away in 1949 in California. So that's the Cortimiglia story. It's just wowzers.
It was a crazy one. It was very suspenseful.
The poor Giordano's, man.
I know.
So there are just 3 more families to talk about. So the next victim was Joseph Sparrow, and he was attacked and killed on December 13th, 1920. So this is 7 days after the Giordanos were released from prison. So Joseph, he was married. Him and his wife had 5 children. I could not find his wife's name. This is how little of information there was on this family. But they did own a grocery store. And at 1 a.m. on December 13th, 1920, him and his wife were attacked. The baby was also in bed with them as well. Sadly, Joseph, he died from the attack. His wife was injured but expected to live. And the baby was injured as well, but expected to live. Joseph's wife, she said that she woke up during the attack. And so then she said she woke back up around 4 a.m. and she went to check on her other children. And so when she realized that they were all okay, she sent the oldest to get help from a neighbor. And when the authorities arrived, they noticed that the screen on the kitchen window was removed and the window was open. And they didn't think that robbery was the motive because there was cash and jewelry left right there on the dresser. So the bloody axe was found leaning on the kitchen wall. And there was also a bloody knife found in the kitchen sink. And the knife was halfway washed off. So the knife and the axe, it did belong to the family.
Same thing.
Same thing. It's so crazy. Joseph's wife said, we don't have any enemies. Life's good. She had nothing to offer the authorities. And so the family, they were taken to the hospital, and Joseph's wife, she had a slashed jaw and she had a major wound to her head. The baby had a fractured skull and a cut on her cheek. And Joseph, like we said earlier, he passed away from his injuries. He was 48, and he had a broken jawbone, multiple wounds to his head, and a slashed throat, which they think that's what the knife was used for. Now, sadly, they did think that the baby girl was going to survive, but she did pass away the next day. The police, they talked to the oldest son, the one who went to get help, and his name was Peter. He was 12 years old. And this testimony kind of made me tear up a little bit. He could barely get through the questioning because he was so upset. The police officers said that his lip would quiver because he was so sad. I know, it just like makes me tear up. He said that the sight of his mother and baby sister covered in blood was so frightening. But the police, like all the others, they had no suspects. At first, they thought, well, is this a vendetta killing? Did they have enemies? But that didn't go anywhere either. So on January 1st, 1921, Joseph's wife, she was released from the hospital. And she said that she intended to stay at the home and run the grocery store. But after that, there's not much information on the family. So hopefully they were able to move on and live happy lives as much as they could. But 12 days later, the Axeman struck again. Yeah, he's on a roll. Exactly, he is. So on January 12th, 1921, an intruder entered the home/grocery store of John Orlando. And the intruder attacked John, his wife, Mary, and their 2 kids, Paul and Josephine. So this attacker went to 2 separate bedrooms to attack the family. So the family was discovered the next day when a little girl went to the store at 6 a.m. to buy milk. So this is
the same thing
reoccurring.
Over and over.
Yep. And so she noticed that the store was closed, which she thought was really odd because she said that the Orlandos usually open their store around 5. And she went around to the back of the establishment where the family lived. And when she peered through the window, she saw the family laying in their beds and they were all covered in blood.
Oh,
I know, these poor little kids that are finding these bodies. So she starts screaming and runs to the neighbor for help. And I'm not laughing at this situation. I'm just laughing at how, this is just crazy how repetitive it all is.
Right.
It's just, it almost feels like a dream or a movie and then the little girl found them, and then the little girl found them. And
the lack of any evidence. They have nothing to go on.
Nothing.
And this just continually goes on and on and on.
Exactly. It's so bizarre. So the authorities, they came to the house and all the family members were taken to the hospital. And the authorities, they actually brought bloodhounds to this. I know, Mom's like, finally, something different. To see if they could track down the killer. It didn't go anywhere, but at least they were trying something different here. And so the police, they found the axe leaning against the wall in the bedroom. And this scene, the police said they were just shocked at the amount of the blood in the bedroom. They said it was on the ceiling, it was on the door, it was just everywhere. Sadly, John, the dad, he did pass away from his injuries that day. And the rest of the family, they were expected to recover. And after this, I don't know what happened to the Orlando family.
Well, hopefully, again, they moved on and lived a happy life or lives.
Found peace in some way.
There you go.
So now we are going to go to our very last family of the Axeman victims. This family is the Scalise family. Frank Scalise, he was born on December 20th, 1886, and he came to America in the early 1900s from Palermo, Sicily. He met his future wife, Mary Mansetto, in New Orleans, and they were married there in New Orleans. I'm not sure when, but Mary's family, they also came from Palermo, but she was actually born in New Orleans in 1892. And so the couple, they had 3 children together, and they worked really hard. They saved as much money as they could so that they could buy their own grocery store, and they ran a pretty successful business until, sadly, they were attacked on April 12th, 1921 at 3 a.m. in the morning.
This guy's one after another here.
If you think back to our Esther Albano case, Mike Pepitone, her husband, was killed at this time too, whether or not you believe that was the Axeman or not. So the intruder entered the home by going through a window. He took the family's axe and entered the bedroom of Frank and Mary. And Frank and Mary were sleeping in their bed along with their 20-month-old baby, Johnny. It's like, these poor babies.
Right.
And so the man attacked all 3, and Mary, she started screaming, and this woke up the other children. The oldest daughter, Mary, said she heard the screams and got out of bed, and she said when she opened the door to her bedroom, she saw a man running through the house. And so the authorities were called and arrived at the home and discovered that Frank was already deceased, but they sent Mary and Johnny to the hospital. The police did suspect robbery with this one because apparently cigarettes and cigars were stolen, but cash that was just laying in the grocery store area was not taken. So no rhyme or reason on that one. And the police interviewed Mary quite a bit because she was the one that saw the intruder, but her statements were pretty contradicting from the get-go. She's only 10. and she sees this man in the night, it's dark out. So at first she said the man was short, stout, and was a white man. Then she said later on it may have been a black man. Then she said the intruder actually looked like her Uncle Joe. So Joe was her mother's brother, and he only lived about a block from the family. So the authorities went to the hospital to question the mom, and she said that her brother Joe did loan her husband $500 a few months prior, but that they had been paying him back and there was no hard feelings over this money. However, the police felt that this was a solid suspect and they went and arrested Joe. So the police, they were basically questioning him and they were holding him in jail until they could get fingerprint comparisons back. So we're kind of in, a time frame now where we're fingerprinting. So they took the axe and they pulled fingerprints off the axe and they pulled fingerprints off of the window. And then they got Joe's fingerprints and they were holding him in jail until those fingerprint comparisons came back. And when they came back, they did not match Joe. None of the fingerprints belonged to Joe. So he was released. And after this, the case went cold. There was no suspects.
Yeah, boy.
And Joe, he actually moved in with his sister after this and helped her run the grocery store and the business. And it sounds like the business was successful for quite a few years. Hopefully he forgave the little one for identifying him. Yeah. I think it's Uncle Joe.
She was probably questioned so much.
Oh, I'm sure.
Do you think it was this? Do you think he was this? Do you think it was that?
And it could have even been like, well, do you think it looked like your Uncle Joe? And she might have been like, yeah, the guy kind of looked like Uncle Joe. And they were like, perfect, let's go arrest Joe. She probably
felt like she had to give some sort of answer.
Some sort of an explanation, exactly. That is the end of our Axeman victim cases.
So sad, so many victims.
It's very sad.
And never anything solved.
Never anything solid. As the years go by, and I'm not going to get into all of it, they do arrest a few people. But you're talking like in the 30s and the 40s, thinking, okay, maybe they were the Axeman. Nothing ever panned out, though. So nobody was ever charged and sentenced for these murders, which is crazy. And then you think back to our Esther Albano, where all of this started, and she shot and killed Joseph Mumfree, who a lot of people wondered if he was the Axeman. Right. So I don't know. There's so many things up in the air that you could say, well, maybe it was this, maybe it was this, maybe it was this person, Black Hand. I just hope that we were able to shed some light on these cases that have just been forgotten over the years and show what our Italian American ancestors went through.
Yeah.
I do want to quickly talk a little bit about some other victims. So there was another Italian-American grocery store owner. His name was Steve Boca, and he was attacked and killed by the Axeman. Other than the one article I found in the newspaper, I found nothing on this poor man. Nothing in Ancestry, anything like that. And I do also want to point out the victims that were not Italian-Americans, because there were other victims of the Axeman that were not Italian. We're obviously the Italian American Stories podcast, so we covered the Italian American victims. But they were victims from Germans, Irish, African Americans. And so I just want to pay respect to those victims as well. Like I said earlier, we just really wanted to bring them out of the old newspapers and shed some light on them. But we are done now for the Axeman victims, unless I run across another one and then we'll throw it in sometime. But I don't think we will, so.
It was a good series of episodes.
It was, yes. And I think our next one, we're going to try to do a Tales of the Archives and make it a little bit more lighthearted, because we've been in the throes of death, exactly. So we need to switch it up a little bit. But we hope you enjoyed listening to the last of the Axeman victim stories, and we hope you come back to listen to more stories about Italian Americans. See you next time.
See you next time.